Have you ever thought about the first story that explains how everything began? Like before anything else, before humans, before Earth, before the whole universe got its act together, and maybe even before any gods decided to clock in for their cosmic shift. Today we're going on a trip back in time to check out this ancient tale. Welcome aboard. Imagine the darkest room you've ever been in. Now take away the room. That's how the oldest stories describe the beginning of everything. Just a whole lot of nothing. Not even a speck of dust. These tales talk about a time before time called Tekor, which means the nothingness. After that, we got Tepo, or the night, which was as dark as it gets. The first light wasn't a big dramatic sunrise, but more like a dimly glowing worm. When the sun and moon finally popped up, there was nobody around to see them. Talk about throwing a party and nobody showing up. So, when someone tries to start a story with, "in the beginning," just remember, according to these ancient tales, the real beginning was with absolutely zip, zilch, nada. It's like the universe's quietest Big Bang. No flashy lights, no heroic battles, just a silent stretch from nothing into everything. It's the ultimate started from the bottom, now we're here story, without any background music. Ever wonder how we piece together ancient stories? It's not just about cracking open dusty tomes, but connecting dots across genetics, archaeology, and languages to see how stories traveled with humans. Imagine a giant puzzle of myths, and we're trying to fit each piece exactly where it belongs in the grand timeline of human history. This process, powered by some serious computer wizardry, is known as phylogenetics, basically Ancestry.com, but for ancient tales. Let's talk about the Earth Diver, the OG of landscape architects. Imagine a bird or sea creature playing in the mud at the bottom of the ocean, and then, bam, we've got land. This bird was like the first person to think, let's make something out of nothing, turning mud into the ground we walk on. From this mud-made land, humans show up, ready to turn a blank space into home base, using whatever's around, rocks, trees, you name it. This idea probably started with tales about people coming straight from the underground, no birds involved. But as stories evolve, so did this one, turning into what we know as Earth Diver myths. It shows us that our ancestors were pretty creative in explaining how the world got its start, not just fixing after a big flood, but actually creating the Earth from scratch. When Earth Diver tales started mixing with flood stories, things got a remix. Picture a bird on a top-secret mission to find land after everything's been flooded. It's like the animal kingdom's version of a spy movie. This bird, our bird scout, isn't looking for mud, but for a sign that it's safe to land again. When Noah sends out a dove in his story, and it comes back with a twig, it's a big deal. Like finding dry land is a cause for celebration. This twist in the tale shows how old stories transform over time, giving us clues on how our ancestors' storytelling changed as they faced new challenges or moved to new places. It's like following a trail back to the very first chapter of the human storybook. Jumping into the pool of creation myths, we've got everything from chaotic waters birthing land to giants getting dissected to form the world. But standing out in this crowd is the Earth Diver, the ancient world's blockbuster hit. You might be wondering which of these wild tales is the oldest. While that's a tough puzzle, signs point to the Earth Diver as one of the earliest, possibly starting out in Africa and traveling with humans as they explored new horizons. This story has been handed down and reshaped over generations, like a family heirloom that gets more interesting with each retelling. As we piece together these age-old stories, we're not just learning about our ancestors' imagination, we're also seeing how they tried to make sense of their world. Each twist in the tale, each new version, helps us trace our way back to the beginnings of storytelling itself, uncovering the roots of human creativity and curiosity. Ever thought about how ancient people came up with stories to explain where land came from? Imagine them looking around and asking, so, how did all this start? Early tales talk about a time when there was absolutely nothing, just a big, empty, dark space or a wild, untamed sea. Then, suddenly, things start happening. Gods appear, doing their thing, and humans eventually show up to join the party. This idea of starting from zero is a big hit in stories from places like Europe and Asia. But guess what? This whole Earth Diver adventure, where someone dives into the ocean to bring up land, wasn't a thing in Africa. It looks like this idea popped up after people started to explore new lands. Diving into these stories helps us understand why our ancestors were so into the idea of making land come out of nowhere. It turns out stories about chaotic seas and big empty spaces are pretty common. You've got dragons causing trouble in the Near East, and even the very first lines of the Bible give a shout out to chaos. Over in India, the Rig Veda, which is super old, talks about how everything started from something that wasn't quite there, with gods clocking in later rather than sooner. But it's not just a story from one place. Japanese myths talk about gods popping up and land just floating around in a big empty void. Then there's the tale of giant turtles holding the earth steady in Southeast Asia and China, while other stories talk about land just rising up from the sea. Oh, and we can't forget about the world tree, this big, magical tree that holds up the sky or the land. This part of the story shows up all over the place, proving our ancestors were pretty creative when it came to explaining how the world worked. It's like they were the original fantasy writers, coming up with all these wild ideas to explain the big, mysterious world around them. Ever heard of the world tree or tree of life? It's not your typical tree that you'd find in a park. This tree is like the Swiss Army knife of ancient stories. It holds up lands, keeps the sky where it should be, and even stops stars from falling. You'll find it in all sorts of myths, from the Vikings' tales to Greek legends, and there's even a story about a kid being born from a banana tree in Taiwan. This idea has been around longer than the oldest family recipe and is just as popular. In the beginning, the world tree's gig was to make sure the earth stayed put and to keep the sky from dropping on our heads. But as stories evolved, so did the tree's role. It turned into mountains, pillars, or even the setting for the stars in the sky. Plus, it helped develop the story of people coming from some mysterious underworld, making our origin tales a bit more interesting. So next time you're sitting under a tree, just think, it might be holding up more than just leaves. It's like the ultimate handyman of the mythological world. Think of creation myths as the ultimate playlist mashup, where the world gets a cosmic reboot. Imagine being so far from the ocean you can only dream of floods. Yet here's a story saying, let's flood the world to start fresh. Enter the Kalevala from Finland, where a chill session in the sea turns epic. A duck drops eggs on Luanatar's knee, and bam, we have everything from Earth to stars, all because of a splash. It's like the ancient world's version of mixing water chaos with an egg-based origin story, showing us this storytelling remix has roots from every corner of the globe. Reading these tales is like a sneak peek into ancient brains, using their wild imaginations to stitch the world together with the cosmic equivalent of duct tape and glitter. And that, my friends, is how you craft a universe on a DIY budget. Anna Birgitta Ruth took a deep dive, pun intended, into 300 North American First Nation mythologies and found 8 different creation story types. The most popular? You guessed it, the Earth Diver. It seems the Earth Diver motif swam all the way from Siberian cultures into North America, proving that good stories really do travel far. Let's check out one of these tales. Imagine an old couple chilling in their tundra-mound house, surrounded by an endless sea. Then, out of nowhere, land starts appearing around them, thanks to 3 heroic diver birds from heaven who snagged some mud from the ocean floor. They send a white raven to check out the new land. After a few trips, the raven comes back late, turned black from a dirty snack, showing just how much the earth has grown. This story not only has the Earth Diver making a splash, but also teases a Bird Scout motif. Sometimes it's a man or a god doing the diving, snagging a grain of sand or mud under their nail, which then becomes land. So, where did this epic tale start? Though we've lost the original blockbuster myth, bits and pieces like the Earth Diver, the World Tree, and humans popping out of nowhere are scattered worldwide. From Eurasia to North America, and even down under in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Australia, these motifs hint at an African origin, tagging along with human migration some 75,000 years ago. Digging into why our ancestors imagined land coming from sea mud, it seems they were onto something. In a world covered by water, where else would you get building materials? This myth does more than tell a story. It reflects a deep connection between humans and the earth, often using the same mud or sand that supposedly created the world. And while some myths have humans emerging from trees, the essence remains the same. Our stories are as diverse as the people who tell them, rooted in a rich soil of imagination and mystery. Ever wonder why so many old stories talk about diving into the sea to create land? Well, it turns out, both North American and some African tales have this quirky detail about dirt under fingernails being something special. In some flood stories, a simple fingernail trim causes a whole flood. Maybe, in these creation myths, the act of getting mud or sand from under a fingernail was their way of explaining how land popped up out of nowhere. This dive into creation myths is just scratching the surface. Researchers are digging into these stories, looking at old cave paintings and even star alignments to see how far back these tales go, maybe as far back as 130,000 years. It's a peek into what our ancestors thought about the world around them and how they chose to explain it. Who knows what else we'll find as we keep exploring these ancient narratives. If you loved exploring these ancient stories with us, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with your favorite myth. Until next time, keep wondering.